dear friends. So I see the socializing in the room as indication that it is a great tradition to have a New Year lecture where everyone can get together and chat and catch up. So this is the fourth or even the fifth, I'm not even sure, New Year lecture of the cluster. But there's one number I'm very sure of, and that is 1844. That is the number of days we've had the Africa Multiple Cluster of Excellence. And today, I think, will go down as a special day in the history of our cluster, because we have the unique pleasure and honor to have two top-notch speakers here in the room, Professor Akosua Adomako Ampofo and Professor Grace Musila, who will give a lecture and a response at today's event. And they are both members also of our advisory board. The advisory board meets tomorrow, and we are tremendously pleased and honored to have you both here at the same time, at the same place in the snow. So please join me in welcoming our two speakers. I'm not going to take a lot of the time now, just a few words what you are going to expect or what you can expect today, and that is an introduction of our lecturer by Dr. Fulera Isaka Touré, who is a scholar of Islamic studies at the University of Ghana and also a research fellow at the University of Bayreuth. And she will also, after the lecture, give a formal introduction to Professor Musila, and then we'll devote maybe a quarter of an hour, perhaps a little more, a little less, to a Q&A session together with our listeners in the Zoom, whom I also welcome very warmly. I think we are now ready to go, and I would like to ask Dr. Isaka Touré to come to the podium. Thank you.
Hello? Yeah. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is with honor that I present our speaker in the annual New Year lecture series of the Africa Multiple Cluster of Excellence of none other than the University of Bayreuth, a university in a small city in Bavaria, yet known and attracts the entire world of African studies because of what it stands for. It has always offered from inception and continues to offer in the study of African studies by men, women from various regions of the world. The speaker is a professor of African and Gender Studies at the Institute of African Studies, University of Ghana, Legon. She describes herself as an activist scholar, and her work is informed by her faith, questions of identity and power, and a commitment to social justice. Her areas of interest include African knowledge systems, higher education, race and identity politics, gender relations, masculinities, and popular culture. She holds a BSc in architectural designs, an MSc in development planning from the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology, Kumasi, Ghana, a postgraduate diploma in spatial planning from the University of Dortmund, Germany, and a PhD in sociology from the University of Vanderbilt. In 2005, she became the foundational director of the University of Ghana's Center for Gender Studies and Advocacy from 2010 and 2015. She was the director of the African Studies in the university. She's the founding vice president and immediate past president of the African Studies Association of Africa. an honorary professor at the Center for African Studies at the University of Birmingham, UK, and a fellow of the Ghana Academy of Arts and Sciences. Her most recent book, co-edited with Josephine Bioku Betts, is titled Producing Inclusive Feminist Knowledge, Positionalities and Discourses in the Global South, published by Emerald Publishing in 2021. She co-produced the documentary When Women Speak with Kate Skinner and directed by Aseye Tamaklo in 2022 as part of a project titled An Archive of Activism, Gender and Public History in Post-Colonial Ghana. The project seeks to create a publicly accessible archive of gender, activism, and political women. She is the editor-in-chief, Contemporary Journal of African Studies, co-editor, Critical Investigations into Humanitarianism in Africa blog, and has served on the boards of organizations such as the U.S. African Studies Association, the Center for the Advancement of Scholarship, University of Pretoria, Africa Multiple Cluster of Excellence, our dear University of Bayreuth, of which she is the chairperson, Perivoli African Research Center, University of Bristol, Institute for Humanities in Africa, HUMA, University of Cape Town, Advisory Council, North Rhine-Westphalia Academy of International Affairs, SOS Herman Minor International College, Beyond Borders, ZEIT Stiftung Eberlin, and Gerhard Bossero's Scholarship Program, and the next generation of the Social Science Research Council of the United States, among others. She is a member of the Council for the Development of Social Science Research Council called CODESRA, the Network for Women's Rights in Ghana, and the Domestic Violence Coalition in Ghana also. She has consulted for several international organizations, including UNICEF, UNIFEM, UNAIDS, Save the Children, Ministry for Gender and Social Protection of Ghana, Participatory Development Associates, Gender Studies and Human Rights Documentation Center, and of course the Kofi Annan Peacekeeping and Training Center and World Health Organization. Her work has been variously recognized. She has been a fellow at the Rockefeller Foundation's Bellagio Center, a Mellon Fellow at the Center for African Studies at the University of Cape Town, a Fulbright Junior Scholar, a New Century Fulbright Scholar, and a Senior Fulbright Scholar in Residence. In 2010, she was awarded the Feminist Activism Award by Sociologists for Women and Society. In 2015, she was the African Studies Association of America's African Studies Review Distinguished Lecturer. And in 2019, she delivered the Audrey Richards Distinguished Public Lecture at the Center for African Studies at the University of Cambridge. She is the 2023-2024 Wangari Maathai Visiting Professor at the University of Kassel. The speaker has also mentored several students and emerging scholars in various universities around the world. She is also a senior scholar of the African Feminist Initiative. Ladies and gentlemen, I take this opportunity to introduce our August speaker, who is Professor Dr. Akosua Adomako Ampofo. Professor Yamawa Kwaba.
Guten Abend alle. Okay. So I want to, first of all, thank you all for being here. And to everyone online, also thank you. It's, today is what, Thursday, right? It's a Thursday evening, it's cold. I can think of many possibly more interesting things to do on a Thursday evening, but I'm really grateful that you are all here. And thanks very much to the cluster and to our dean, Prof. Seisman, for doing me this honor of inviting me to do this. And you're also taking a slight risk, because with somebody like me, you can never be sure what I'm going to say. So, but hopefully it will be all good. I'm also really pleased that Professor Grace Musila is going to be the respondent, because I can't think of a more sensitive, reflective, she personifies her name, Grace, to respond to my comments this evening. So yes, very, very happy to be here. I'd like us to start by doing something that I have learned to do from a sister colleague, Wangui Wagoro, who, and I have now established this as something that I often do when I'm speaking somewhere, which is to offer remembrance and acknowledgement to our ancestors. So if you will indulge me, I'm going to mention a few names of our senior brothers and sisters who passed in 2023, just a very small snippet, and that we will use this as a point of contact to acknowledge those who have gone before us and have worked so hard. So these are just very few selected heroes. The first one on my list, and in no particular order, is Yakuba Sawadogo, who died last year at the age of 77. And I'm going to cite here from the website Right Livelihood, who gave him an award. He was known as, quote, the man who stopped the desert. Starting around 1980, during a phase of severe drought, he successfully created an almost 40-hectare forest on formerly barren and abandoned land. Today, it has more than 60 species of trees and bushes and is arguably one of the most diverse forests planted and managed by a farmer in the Sahel region. Sawadogo's remarkable success builds on experimenting with traditional planting pits for soil, water, and biomass retention. Called Zaya, or Zaye, I'm not sure, in the local language. He continued innovating the technique over the years, increasing crop yields and successfully planting trees. Despite facing resistance from locals in the beginning, Sawadogo was called a madman because he was trying to stop the desert from coming, and people did not believe that planting trees, I mean, how many trees is he going to plant? He never considered giving up. And over time, people came to admire his work, and he received many awards, including in 2018, the Right Livelihood Award. Next on my list is Mbongi Ngema, a renowned South African playwright, producer, and composer. He died last year at the age of 68. Ngema's body of work included the lauded theater production Woza Albert, which first showed in 1981 and went on to win more than 20 awards across the world. The political satire explored the second coming of Jesus Christ as a black man, returning to South Africa as a black man, and you know, what that would mean in a place like South Africa. He was best known for creating the hit Sarafina, which first premiered on Broadway in 1988. Sarafina told the story of a young student and how she inspired her peers to fight against racial segregation in apartheid South Africa after her teacher was thrown in jail. It was adapted into a musical drama starring Whoopi Goldberg in 1992. I'm sure many of you have seen it, becoming an international success, and he was nominated for both Tony and Grammy Awards. Third person on my list is Amata Edu, who was a Ghanaian. She died last year at the age of 81. She was a Ghanaian writer whose work, written in English, emphasized the paradoxical position of the modern African woman. Edu began to write seriously while she was a mere honest student, very young woman at the University of Ghana, and won early recognition with a problem play, The Dilemma of a Ghost, published in 1965, in which a Ghanaian student returning home brings his African-American wife into the traditional culture and the extended family that he now finds restrictive. Their dilemma reflects Edu's characteristic concern with Bintus, people who have been and are coming back. In other words, educated abroad. And the play voices, again, her semi-autobiographical experimental work, which she continues in the novel Assisted Killjoy, Reflections from a Black-Eyed Squint, published in 1966. A fearless feminist and Pan-Africanist, often appearing coy in her photographs, she was never diffident and served only 1 year as Ghana's Minister of Education. She couldn't survive longer than that. Next on my list is Henry Lopez, who died last year at the age of 86 and was considered one of the talented writers who made Congo, quote, the Latin Quarter of Central Africa. Born under the so-called Belgian Congo before independence, he became a prime minister under Marianne Ngobi's Marxist-Leninist regime between 1973 and 1975. He was a former deputy director of UNESCO for Africa and Congo's ambassador to France at some point for many years. Considered to be free-spirited by many, he wrote about the contemporary history of Africa and was the author of numerous works, including novels such as Les Pleurs Rires, Ma Grande-Mère Bantou et Mes Ancêtres les Joalois, Sans Tam-Tam, Il est déjà demain, from the website Africa News. Two more. Harry Belafonte died last year at the age of, he was born in 27, so you can do the math for me. Harry Belafonte was a movie star, as we all know, blessed with good looks, an activist anger, and a voice that told songs of struggle, loss, and sweet memory. He moved generations with both his rhythm and his rage, catching the social conscience of the nation as he caught their ear, with such hits as Deo, Matilda, and Jamaica Farewell. He was the first artist to sell 1 million albums with the 1956 release of Calypso, first Caribbean artist. And Belafonte would go on to become an EGOT. In other words, he won an Emmy, a Grammy, an Oscar, and a Tony. That's a big deal in the entertainment world. And he was a Kennedy Center honoree and a recipient of the National Medal of Arts in the US. But his influence would become even more pronounced as an advocate for social justice at home and abroad, serving as a UNICEF Goodwill Ambassador. He supported efforts for education, the eradication of nuclear weapons, and the fight against HIV, AIDS, and apartheid. I take this from CBS News website. My last honoree is Rosalind Pope, who died last year at the age of 84. She was a college professor and musician who wrote, quote, An Appeal for Human Rights, a document that laid out the reasons for the Atlanta student movement's cries against systemic racism in 1960. The document Pope wrote as a 21-year-old senior at Spelman College launched a nonviolent campaign of boycotts and sit-ins by Black college students protesting discrimination, not just in voting, but in education, jobs, housing, hospitals, movies, concerts, restaurants, and law enforcement. Remember, we're just at the edge of the Jim Crow era when she's doing this. Atlanta's white-owned newspapers wouldn't publish the statement, and Georgia's segregationist leaders tried to dismiss it, saying it couldn't possibly be the work of mere college students. But the New York Times ran it on a full page, as did other publications across the US. It was read into the congressional record as a testament to how segregation was stifling the ability of people to coexist with equality and dignity. I take this from the Associated Press News. And so now, if you would indulge me, can we have a moment of silence to remember our favorite ancestors and to honor them for the work that they have done. Thank you. If we agree that we aim to transform the societies we inhabit, if we want to be true to an African agenda, the question we must ask ourselves, especially in these crazy times, is how can our intellectual practice contribute to transformation? What legacy will I leave behind when I transition to join the ancestors? What seeds am I planting? How are we investing what we have? Will we reap a harvest? What will your legacy be? So I often use music and actually play music, and we'll listen to some music at the end, because if I use popular music, then it gives me some street cred with young people, and it comes in handy. But if I'm being very honest, if you're going to rate my popular culture credibility, I think that the best that I might get is a B+, maybe, but definitely a B. However, as a living, breathing person, I know enough to get by at dinner table conversations, and I've researched enough on music where I can know what somebody's doing at the moment. I can give you some interesting facts on Beyonce or Jay-Z or Burna Boy or somebody, right? I can even toss in some big names, as I just did. This knowledge is thanks in no small part to the young people in my orbit and Spotify. And actually, my husband comes a close second. He does a good job. So being surrounded, you have to take from people who are around you. Music is experienced and understood as an integral part of our self-identity. It is closely linked with personal memories and significant moments of history. It's a form of self-expression, markers and statements of who we are and how we feel. For people of African descent, music accompanies all of our rites of passage. Music welcomes us into the world in the outdooring ceremonies of a baby. It proclaims our progress during graduation ceremonies. It announces and celebrates our marriages. In the academy, we are heralded with music before an inaugural lecture when we become professors. And music sends us on our way to join the ancestors when we transition into the next world. So, taking a slice out of Nigerian singer Tems' book, I employ her song Crazy Tings as a metaphor to evoke the image of the multiple crazy things that abound in the academy, which is itself situated in a very crazy world, and I doubt anybody will disagree with me on that. More importantly, however, I reflect on how, in the midst of this craziness, we might reflect on our commitment to global Africa, and how can this commitment extend beyond scholarly pursuits and embrace a dedication to truth, cultural integrity, and social responsibility in the pursuit of knowledge. How can our work have a transformative impact within the academy and our broader communities? How can we leave a true legacy that restores, respects, and heals? And so as I take a slice out of her book, you see academics, of her song, Crazy Tings, you might think about, if you know the song, where were you first heard it, and what did it mean for you? And I hope you know Tems and have listened to, if not danced to, Crazy Tings. Crazy Tings, I'm sorry. Tems, born Temilade Openiye, is a Nigerian singer, songwriter, and record producer. If you didn't know that, please know it now. And according to Wikipedia, she rose to prominence after being featured on WizKid's 2020 single Essence. If you don't know WizKid, know him now. Which peaked at number 9 on the Billboard Hot 100 chart, following the release of the remix version with Justin Bieber. Why that had to happen is another story, but fine, thank you, Justin Bieber. The song earned her a Grammy nomination. The same year, she was featured on the song Fountains by Drake. Tems covered Bob Marley's No Woman, No Cry for the Black Panther Wakanda Forever soundtrack in 2022. That one you should know. And in the same month, her song Free Mind from her debut EP, which debuted on the Billboard Hot 100, peaked at number 46 and broke the female record for longest charting #1 song on the R&B hip-hop airplay chart. Go Tems. So, okay, Crazy Tings, and the refrain of this song goes like this. I wish I could sing. It would be so much more exciting, but I'm so bad. But anyway, crazy things are happening. Crazy things are happening. If you need somebody's craze, you fit chop somebody's craze. So you do your madness, and I'll do my madness. The lyrics of the song describe a state of confusion and chaos where things are not as they should be, and Tems evokes a sense of being fed up with it all, but determined not to let somebody else's craziness undo her own well-being. In this sense, I employ Tems' Crazy Things as a metaphor for the state of our nations as well as the academy, which, like our nations, is facing several challenges and changes that could be described as uncertain, confused, confusing, even chaotic. Thus, navigating the academic landscape while remaining true to an emancipatory agenda for global Africa, while simultaneously retaining our humanity, can pose both challenges and opportunities. Okay, I forgot to give you this slide. So you have 2 seconds to look at it. There's Tems. So the Crazy Academy. In the academy, multiple crazy things abound. We're going to look at just 3. One such challenge is the instrumentalism that abounds, the increasing pressure to produce measurable outcomes, we all know that, such as through research grants and publications, sometimes at the expense of more open-ended explorations and discoveries. Consciously or inadvertently, the goals of a grant-awarding organization can push or encourage a researcher to a certain approach methodologically and epistemologically. We respond to grant calls. So the grant call is going in a certain direction, and we are following it. The pressure to publish in so-called international journals, read Euro-American, and high impact, read as measured by citation matrices, can impact what we work on such that it can be supply-driven promotion criteria rather than demand-driven based on the relevance for our local conditions and those of our citizens globally. This pressure can lead to a loss of focus on what I believe should be the true purpose of scholarship, to improve the conditions of human beings in our communities in some way. This could range from improving locally relevant knowledge to impacting policy. Another crazy thing in the academy is the proliferation of new technologies and digital platforms. We use these for research and teaching, and while these tools offer many benefits, they also bring with them new challenges and complexities, such as the need to navigate complex data privacy laws, paywalls, and the potential for technological bias and discrimination. The internet has made it easier to access vast amounts of information, but the quality of that information, as we all know, may not always be reliable, and it takes a lot of time to fact check. A potent example of this blossoming is the multitude of digital archives that are promising restitution, restoration, digital reparations, and a lot of other R's. Many innovative projects by unsophisticated and low-resourced Africans have been hijacked by well-resourced scholars and activists in the North. And we must learn to navigate and evaluate sources carefully and be determined not to lend our spirits to thieves and imposters. But that's a lot of work. So with so much information available, it can be very challenging to process and synthesize this all. To borrow a biblical verse, the thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy, but the true shepherd comes to give abundant life. Today, more than ever, how do we address issues of ownership, acknowledgement, and intellectual property? So many people out there ready to steal our stuff. Do these new and often attractive and sexy platforms come to give abundant life to the spirits and memories that have been untethered from their ancestors? The availability of digital platforms and technologies has also led to new research methods and data sources. But this also means that researchers must adapt to new tools and approaches to remain current. And this pressure can also be overwhelming and lead to shortcuts. And now add all the AI tools that are available, right? Our millennials and Gen Z are both most adept at navigating these sites, but they are also most susceptible to overload and exploitation. What role are we playing as mentors to them to not only train them in the technicalities of our professions, but also offer kindness, support, and grace? And all of this digital stuff leads to new anxieties. Like tonight, I was thinking, okay, oh my God, this thing is going to be recorded. Am I going to say something that I'm going to regret? So let's talk about the next one, which is cancel culture. It has come. It's not going anywhere. So we experience unprecedented levels of scrutiny and criticism from groups and individuals, both within and outside the academy. Scrutiny from those I will refer to as the righteous or moral right, and the woke or liberal left. And I use these adjectives tongue-in-cheek so that I'm not misquoted, to reflect the ways in which politically polarized opponents often view and describe each other. Sometimes politicians and the media question the value and relevance of our academic research and expertise. Even colleagues in the academy have become increasingly critical, especially on platforms like formerly known as Twitter, X. And we see unprecedented levels of competition and sibling rivalry in the academy, as many of us, even if we don't seek to become celebrity academics, we are susceptible to firing off a quick op-ed piece in a broadsheet newspaper, calling forth our own credentials in a pretentious reference to our research, publications, or connections. I have seen some people literally giving us their CVs in the public space. It's like, who do you think I am? Some of us are not beneath name-dropping, or thinly veiled name-dropping for that matter. But set one foot awry, and you may be cancelled for all your long and beautiful CV. This can create a sense of chaos and uncertainty among scholars who may feel that their work is being unfairly dismissed or marginalized. And as I said, I myself am sometimes nervous at the prospect. I grew up at a time when we spoke freely and we engaged freely, and the footprints were not there to be pulled out later to say this is what you said, or to be quoted out of context. Which influential intellectual could judge me based on a sliver of my composite work? Of woes, what if I get the fact wrong? What new terminology might I be unaware of, and so I misspeak and I'm judged? Yes, my ego would suffer a momentary injury, but I think more important than that is the potential impact on the younger ones who respect and look up to me. We must speak our truth. It is important to call people out for infractions. But who determines what an infraction is? Who checks if it indeed occurred? Who decides the punishment or how widely the details should be disseminated? Yes, we must indicate our positionality, but it's not always about our positionality. There's a time to decenter ourselves in the spirit of social responsibility, transformation, and sometimes healing. So before we go for our siblings publicly, a moment of introspection to ask ourselves, whose truth am I speaking? Who am I speaking for? May be in order so that we don't end up silencing or worse, patronizing the very people that we are speaking for. And I want to do a little sidestep to give you a personal experience from 2019. Fulera mentioned that I gave a lecture at Cambridge University. In fact, I gave 2 lectures. In addition to the one that she mentioned, there was somebody who was heading a program that brought multidisciplinary students together. And when he heard that I was giving this lecture in Cambridge, he said, "Would you come and speak to my students?" And I said, "Sure." Looking at your students, they come from diverse disciplines, mainly from STEM. And at the moment, I'm doing a lot of talking around race and, matters that are problems for younger Africans all over the world. Can I come and be provocative? And he said, "Sure, provocation is good." So I go and give the lecture, and he introduces me as somebody who can be controversial and provocative. And we had this conversation, so I was cool. Fast forward a few weeks, I was a young white woman at Cambridge who, without knowing the backstory to this lecture I had been invited to, posted on Twitter that what happened that evening was a final straw for her. So there had been some previous occasions where some lecturers at Cambridge had used the N-word and they had not been called out. And for her to see this African professor come from Africa and a woman, and for her to be introduced as provocative and controversial was for her the final straw, and she was going to leave Cambridge. Now, fine, that's her decision. She was at the lecture. After the lecture, she did not come and speak to me. She did not find out if something had transpired before. She was being an unwanted savior, and I felt very, very patronized. I'm sure that was not her intention, but we need to be very, very careful. Speaking of cancel culture, silencing, and muzzling, there's an elephant in the room these days, which, out of respect for my hosts and where we are located on the face of God's earth, I will not name, but we all know an elephant when we see one. I'm talking about the different framings, theorizations, conceptualizations, and approaches to similar situations in different parts of the world. We all know the old phrase, one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter, right? So, when I ask questions, how can we embrace a dedication to truth, cultural integrity, and social responsibility in the pursuit of knowledge? How can our work have a transformative impact within the academy and our broader communities? How can we leave a true legacy that restores, respects, and heals? I'm making certain assumptions. One, I'm assuming that those of us in the room and online, that we share certain values as scholars that we seek to be true to. I'm also assuming that those values include a decolonial agenda. And I'm not going to spend time speaking on those values because I believe we're all in the choir here and we know that song and we know the tune. And we want to build knowledge that improves the lives of Africans globally and marginalized people everywhere. I'm going to assume we want to be diligent and thorough in our work, and that we want our scholarship to be original, creative, exciting. I'm going to assume we want to treat others as kindly and honestly as we want to be treated ourselves as we carry out our work. I'm going to believe that we want to encourage the weary and lift the faint-hearted. We cannot pigeonhole our humanity, extend it to some people, but not to others. Many of our revered leaders, such as Kwame Nkrumah and Nelson Mandela, reminded us that our emancipation can never be complete while others remain colonized and under occupation. We cannot reconfigure African studies with any form of bifurcation, divisiveness between the good guys and the bad guys. The good guys who may perpetrate violence because, and the others who aren't really victims because. We cannot truthfully reconfigure African studies in part without a dedication to the inherent truth that African studies is basically an emancipatory project and cannot succeed in isolation of the freedoms of all colonized people, wherever they may be on God's earth. Aramzia in the Frankfurter Rundschau of January 4th, in an article titled, and I quote, "The Dispute Over Post-Colonial Studies, It is Ultimately About Equal Rights for All Peoples," speaks to this trend to create perpetrator-victim dichotomies, ignoring contradictions, building a new front between the left and the right, and lifting guilt to cult levels, he says, and I quote, "In the first Iraq War, Stuart Hall pointed out both the imperialist interests of the US Army and Saddam Hussein's crimes against the Iraqi, and especially the Kurdish population, and opposed the clear division between the good guys and the bad guys. With regard to the ban on widow cremation in India by the British colonial power, Jatri Spivak has pointed out the dilemma of Indian women. Do they welcome the law? Do they confirm the civilizing mission of the colonial rulers? Do they criticize it? Do they reinforce native patriarchy? Two things can be true at the same time. How can we be sensitive to contradictions and ambivalences? Unless we absolutely believe in the idea that there can be a common good, we will not reconfigure African studies. It is true, the common good is aspirational. It wants, as Cecilia Lynch notes in her book, Wrestling with God, it wants to work towards harmony and well-being, but in practice, it is open to critiques of paternalism and colonialism. So we try, and we are criticized, and we try again. In the so-called West or global North or whatever, there's still too much belief in the need to influence with your ideas on democracy, equality, secularism, terrorism, gender, sexuality, research, ethics, publication ethics, research methodologies, etc., etc. There needs to be more self-reflection about, to quote Cecilia Lynch from the same book, and I quote her, ethical assumptions, the good they purport to achieve, and whether and how they achieve them. It is much easier to continue to think about how to improve the lives of others or how to negate their allegedly nefarious cultural activities than to dig deeply into our own possibilities and shortcomings or ask, who might be left out of our conceptions of the common good, unquote. We cannot ignore these ethical tensions and expect to reconfigure African studies. What is our responsibility when it comes to enacting justice in the face of the severe economic, social, and political inequalities in the world, in global Africa? How will we do our knowledge work in solidarity, not just with those who are suffering, but those other people who are suffering? But what about our own colleagues and our students? Street names have been changed, statutes toppled, curricula revisited, Black people hired, and a multitude of diversity inclusion projects have begun. Black authors have been added onto curricula. But then what? Just side note, at the University of Ghana where I teach, we had our own successful toppling of a statue of no less than Gandhi. That's another discussion. And yet, as Tems chants, try, 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 I try. I just won't turn my back tonight. Oh, you try to make me run insane, but you know I'm not the same. I just think I can do better. We all can do better than respond in kind to the craze that people from discordant places seem to inhabit and put on us. So back to my question, how can we be true to an African agenda and survive in today's academy? How can we embrace a dedication to truth, cultural integrity, and social responsibility in the pursuit of knowledge? How can our work have a transformative impact within the academy and our broader communities? How can we leave a true legacy that restores, respects, heals? First of all, whether we are dealing with the instrumentalization in the academy, the challenges of new technology, or the threats or temptations of cancel culture, may I suggest that as we reconfigure African studies, we always center Africa. Yes, we will critique, complain, cry from our pain, but as we seek to restore, we will not continue to make the violent misfortune of history our story, or at least not the center of our story. It's part of our story. We are not simply going back for lost ideas, but we are seeking the places where the story was truncated, aborted, deviated. And we are seeking creative continuation from what happened before the disaster to address the trauma of historic dissonance. Our storytellers responded dynamically to the needs of their communities once upon a time. They created what today we would call Afrofuture visions. Storytelling is one site where we can express our truths, stories in song, text, dance, film, and so forth. In both Ghana and Nigeria that I'm more familiar with, one response to chaotic systems has been a youth-driven explosion of creativity and innovation. From the arts and entertainment through African cuisine to innovations in medicine and engineering, young people are innovating, creating, and designing, often without the infrastructure and resources that their counterparts in the so-called global north have. When the COVID-19 epidemic struck, the continent's youth rose to the occasion swiftly with diverse social and technology-driven innovations to help understand, test for, diagnose the virus, and treat COVID-19 patients. We can ask why those stories didn't make it into the international newspapers. That's another story. We need a therapeutic model or approach if we are to be true to our stated goals and survive intellectually, politically, professionally, materially, and importantly, mentally. We need to rekindle our humanity and live generously. We can't just be giving little snippets of our goodness. Instead of planting seeds of self-centeredness, pride, anger, frustration, let's plant seeds of selflessness, peace, and humility. There's always a moment to pause before hitting the send button, and I don't just mean literally. And I remember a former friend and colleague, and I say former because we are not that close anymore, and perhaps from this narrative you'd understand why. This colleague had a difference with somebody and shared with me an email that they were going to send in response to their annoyance. And I read the email draft, and I said, you know what, sleep on it, don't send it. And their response was, if I sleep on it, tomorrow I might not send it. And I'm like, at that point, like, what do you say, right? And this colleague hit the send button. We don't need to do that. We really don't. Okay, where am I? So, when we live generously, when we cast our bread upon the waters, we reap a harvest of peace. So I have some suggestions that I'm making. And it may all sound like, that's obvious, but I think we have to be intentional about these things. Let's be intentional about our networks. We need to be embedded in collectives. We all know that. Networks of like-minded individuals within and outside our academic institutions. Folks we know will come to our aid if we are dismissed, arrested, deported, because they believe in who we are and what we do. Networks where, as Bell Hooks said, we can heal in community. And I would say we can also thrive in community. These siblings, fellow soldiers, comrades, they provide support and platforms to amplify our work free of judgment or envy. Some become allies. Choose them very carefully. Intellectual agreement is not enough. Then, embracing diverse perspectives. Again, we know this. But the diversity of perspectives within the academy, whilst it's there, we don't necessarily embrace it because we do a lot of us and them. When I first joined the academy, I naively thought this is this wonderful space where we'll all live in community, and then I realized that there were all these barriers. But not everybody was like that, and those who opened and were open to diversity were the people who nurtured me and others the most. The modern academy thrives on a rich exchange of ideas, and incorporating diverse viewpoints can contribute to a more comprehensive understanding of various subjects. For someone like me, who has been called, not always as a compliment, you anti-decolonize, this was now my new middle name, I can fairly say that not everything is about decolonization or the colony. Let's listen and learn from others. I want to say a few words on interdisciplinary approaches. Many, indeed most contemporary issues are multifaceted and can benefit from insights drawn from different disciplines. Related to my earlier point. This approach can allow us to integrate African perspectives into broader academic discussions. Reconfiguring African studies means the work that we do should not merely be, here's an example from Africa, case study, but should also be the building block of methods, approaches in other disciplines. It has become fashionable to be inter and multidisciplinary. How many proposals or theses have I not read that say, I will use a multidisciplinary approach or an interdisciplinary approach? And yet, when I read them, it's more of a salad where I can pick out the individual vegetables than a jollof rice where I can't separate them. We need more of the jollof rice of the salad. Different disciplinary perspectives and how they relate. How do they relate? Let's not just throw them in there, right? We want to see how they are connected. And sometimes I read proposals and I'm wondering, you have all these different perspectives listed and all these different authors. Have you, the authors, read each other's work? Have you even read each other's work? We need to develop a research focus that aligns with our African agenda by conducting research that addresses issues relevant to Africa or involves African perspectives. And then we can meaningfully contribute to academic discourses while staying true to our values. I say, dare to be dangerous. Discard the banal ideas. Discard the fear of being cancelled. It's not everything that's about SDGs, development, or peace and security. And even when these themes are presented to us, dare to interpret them differently. Critical engagements. Engage critically. We all need to engage critically with mainstream academic theories and perspectives. We can boldly challenge assumptions and biases that may exist within certain academic paradigms, but we also need to be open to learning from others. We cannot just be throwing Foucault away when we have not read Foucault. We need to recognize the need for a balance between inclusion and difference. Adhering to our values while adapting to the expectations of the academic community can be a tough tightrope to walk, but walk it we must if we want to remain in the academy. This might involve finding creative ways to integrate our agenda into mainstream academic activities, creative. At the same time, not everything is about bringing everybody in. We don't want to reduce us all to sameness. And difference means that sometimes there will be spaces for certain demographics where other demographics are not welcome because we are dealing with our issues. We need spaces to heal in collective, and those spaces may be all of us or some of us. In the process, we need to read the room, know what to say and when to say it and to whom. Not to tiptoe, I'm not suggesting that we tiptoe around people's sensibilities and sensitivities, but we don't need to create toxic spaces. We're all tired and exhausted. We don't need to create toxic spaces. What does it profit us if we win the argument for Africa, but we lose the souls of our siblings? We need to foster cultural competence among our peers, colleagues, students, and mentors. By educating others about the significance of African perspectives, we can contribute to a more inclusive academic environment. But please, don't expect the Africanists and the Africans and the African-descended people to always be carrying the burden to teach others. And I'm going to do another snippet here from a panel at the African Studies meeting in Freiburg, which was when, 2022? There were some students from, some of your students, Rudiger, were there, and you had just lost one of the students from Nigeria. Maybe there are some students here from then. And so they were grieving. And they were a little, how shall I say, distracted before they started the panel. There were some who had visibly mourned or wept. They were all in mourning, but somebody who had visibly wept. So they were gathering themselves together, and they introduced the panel to us by letting us know what had happened, how wonderful their colleague was, and I think dedicating the panel to him or something like that. So they all made their presentations. At the end of the presentation, there was a guy in the room, first of all, who seemed not to have heard that they were in mourning, so there was not a word about this, right? When people tell you about their pain, at least acknowledge it. And then he went on to ask a question for them to explain racism or white savior or something, one of these concepts that we use. And I can't remember whether it was somebody from the panel or maybe it was me because I also interjected. It's like, dude, the information is there. This is question 101. Go and, expletive deleted, read. Go and read. It's not every day we're going to do your homework for you, right? So please, don't be letting us do the homework for those. Go and read. Talk to people one-on-one and say, I really don't understand this. Genuinely, it's like, no, I'm not going to give you my reference list. Go and read. We need to promote advocacy and activism because, as I said, African Studies is a political project. If you are not in for shaking things up, please, you need to be out. You are in the wrong place. And so we need to strategically explore avenues for advocacy and activism within and outside the academy, policymakers, civil society, government officials, donors, the press. Can we initiate conversations? Can we work towards creating spaces for discussions on diverse perspectives and advocate for the inclusion of non-Western viewpoints in curricular policy and so forth? Can we know who is doing what's out there? I would, for example, in Germany, recommend, and I have a short list, but for example, the group Neue Deutsche Medien. We should be generous with our dissemination strategies. Yes, build generosity into the system. You can learn to be generous. Share knowledge in an accessible way is something that we need to do. We need to know when the jargon is relevant and try to learn when the jargon can be put aside. It's not everyday jargon to make us look like we know a lot. Sometimes the jargon is too much. We cannot reproduce the market-driven model of selling knowledge on the backs of the free labor of academics, postdocs, students, and research assistants. Let's be kind to all those people. So, by way of conclusion, two of my favorite people, I love to cite them. They make the point without me having to say too much. If we have not begun to become an ancestor, then let's ask ourselves, what do I want to be remembered for? And write it down and ask yourself whether people will remember you for this. Dare to be kind. Dare to be kind. My late mother-in-law had a favorite phrase, and she said, "Obia enkase fa wo papasem frimiso." To wit, nobody is going to say, "You've brought goodness to me, get away with it." We all like to embrace goodness. And we all appreciate grace and love and respond positively to it. Extend grace. Advocate for students and colleagues who have less power, the non-tenured. Let's not take ourselves also too seriously in this business. There are a lot of people who are not even reading our work, and we are feeling so great. We need to discard over-bloated ideas of who we are and our posturing. There's a whole world out there who doesn't care that my journal article just got cited by X number of people. We need to learn when to leave the stage. And the fact that I leave this stage doesn't mean that I might not go onto another stage, right? We all have our season, and we should know when to leave. And in that process, some people will walk with us, and some people will not walk with us. Or they will walk with us one day and stop walking with us the next day. I always say, as far as it depends on me, let me be at peace. I don't want to be the one to walk away, but if your expletive deleted is too much and you want to leave, goodbye. And I will close now, and as I do, I leave you with a video which we will play next from the Playing for Change project. Sometimes Africans are accused that we simply love eating, drinking, and dancing too much, those Africans. And we can find it a lot in the literature. That racialized or ignorant at best reading has, of course, been discounted by psychologists and psychiatrists. Eating, drinking, and dancing in community is cathartic and enhances solidarity. It's also a space where people are more likely to be authentic, and the places where we act as we feel. When the camera is off and people are not jotting down what we said and we are drinking a glass of wine, we say the real thing. We feel safe. So as we listen to this song from a multimedia project featuring musicians and singers from across the globe, co-founded in 2002 by the American Grammy Award-winning music producer, engineer, and award-winning film director Mark Johnson, and film producer, philanthropist Whitney Kronke. Please get up and dance, if you will. The eating will come later. In this multi-artist rendition of Higher Ground, originally by Stevie Wonder, I hope to remind us that it won't be too long as we keep on trying that we reach a higher ground. Thank you very much. And, okay, I'm a Mac user. How do I get this thing to work? And then what do I do next? Okay, how can I do full screen? I can't. Okay, remember that I said you can get up and dance. So, me, I'll be dancing. Come on, I can't dance alone.
Gonna keep on trying till I reach the highest ground. Oh, yeah, yeah. Teachers, keep on teaching, and preachers, keep on preaching. World, keep on turning. of sin. I'm so glad that I know more than I knew then. I'm gonna keep on trying till I reach my highest Somebody feel good.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your wonderful lecture. I now introduce the respondent. And the respondent is an associate professor in the Department of African Literature at the University of the Witwatersrand, Johannesburg. She obtained her BA Hons in Language and Literary Studies at the Moi University and had her MA degree in African Literature at the University of Witwatersrand in 2004. She took her PhD in African Literature at the University of Witwatersrand. Her teaching and research interest centers on Anglophone African literature, African popular culture, African feminism, and biography. She took up an appointment as a writing consultant in WITS, that's University of Witwatersrand, Writing Center, taught in other prestigious institutions such as University of Johannesburg, Stellenbosch University, and as a tutor and lecturer, and later rose to the rank of associate professor at the Department of African Literature at the University of Witwatersrand from 2018 to present. She has also co-edited and reviewed several books and articles, some of which are A Death, Retold in Truth and Rumor, Rethinking Eastern African Literacy and Intellectual Landscape, and Against Collaborations, or the Natives Who Wonders of. She is an alumnus of the National Research Foundation Related Researcher Grant, Harold and Doris Torfield Scholarship, WITS Postgraduate Merit Award, and the Andrew Mellon Postgraduate Mentorship Grant. She is currently a member of the Modern Languages Association, African Literature Association, African Humanities Program, and a co-editor of the Contemporary Journal of African Studies. With this brief introduction, I now introduce our respondent in the name of Professor Dr. Grace A. Musila, also an esteemed woman in the forefront of African studies. Having two women on this special occasion marks a significant turn in the study of Africa, and for this to take place within the framework of the University of Bayreuth marks another turn with vital contributions of the university as a continuous pace setter in the state of Africa. Thank you very much. And Professor Musila Vomkelekile, you are welcome to Bayreuth.
Good evening, everyone. I hope my sound is working. Okay. So good evening, everyone, and thank you all so much for joining us this evening, both online, both to those colleagues online, as well as those of you who braved the snow in Bayreuth to join us tonight. Thank you so much. And a big thank you to Dr. Fulerai Sakature for that generous introduction. I sound very clever. Thank you when you frame me like that. So thank you so much. And of course, my deepest gratitude to the extensive community behind Africa Multiple Cluster of Excellence that made today's event possible under the leadership of Professor Rudiger Siesemann and Professor Ute Fendler and the rest of the team. Having organized an event or two in my life, I know the amount of invisible labor that goes into these kinds of events, that what we see when it materializes often obscures a whole lot of labor and effort. So I just greatly appreciate that. I'm also very grateful to all the Bayreuth colleagues who've generously made the effort to ensure that our stay is pleasant and comfortable while we're here. But most of all, a big thank you to my sister, colleague, friend, and compatriot. I happen to have assigned myself Ghanaian citizenship, unprovoked, so yes, compatriot, Professor Akosua Adomako Ampofo, for that powerful lecture that really struck an urgent rallying call to all of us, a call to optimism, a call to renewal, a call to refuse the crazy things that perpetually threaten to derail us from staying on course with the emancipatory project of African studies. A call to remember that we cannot stop at resisting, that our resistance must always retain a keen focus on what we can build in place of what we dismantle. A call to see beyond the present, to engineer futures that spell restoration and possibility, and sometimes futures that we might not be around to enjoy, to indulge in. And here I'm reminded again of yet another woman thinker, and in whose name Prof. Akosua Adomako Ampofo holds a current fellowship, Professor Wangari Maathai, who talks about planting trees as an act of optimism. That a lot of the time, the act of planting trees is an act of optimism about the future, because a lot of the time you're planting trees for people who will in future sit under its shade, and you're not guaranteed that you'll sit under that shade. And that's what I hear, listening to Professor Adomako Ampofo, I hear her inviting us to that sense of optimism about planting trees into the future, so to speak. So she invited us to ask certain questions about how we relate to the agenda of survival and thriving, and I like that combination, that we cannot just be here to survive. We have to be a bit more ambitious than that, survival and thriving of global Africa. And she's asking us to revisit our commitment to global Africa beyond careerism. In her words, how can our work have a transformative impact within the academy and our broader communities? And how can we leave a true legacy that restores, respects, and heals? How do we stand up to the instrumentalism and the tyranny of bibliometric indices that continue to police the perimeters of our thinking? How do we stay in the fight while confronting the increasing commodification of knowledge that cannibalizes the academy's labors and channels it towards our ongoing unhumaning? How do we reverse engineer our ancestral legacies by thinking forward to that difficult question, what will we be remembered for? So Professor Adomako Ampofo has given us a manifesto on how we navigate these crazy things and still survive and thrive in the African academy and in the academy at large. And I find myself in a very difficult position today as a respondent because I'm in full agreement with the critiques and the roadmap that we've been offered. In social media terms, my response is literally a meme pointing upwards, accompanied by 3 words, what she said. Right? But I've been reliably informed that a meme is not the way to respond in polite company. So what I'm going to try and do is to literally translate that meme, aka what she said, and I agree, cosine, into a few reflections. So 3 words animate my response and my co-signing, really, and nodding along to Prof. Adomako Ampofo's provocations. And these are keywords that I've been thinking with in my own work. So I draw great validation and encouragement from your lecture that I'm on the right track with this line of thought. And so my 3 keywords are currency, belatedness, and refusal. And I must apologize in advance to the linguists in the room. I'm not a linguist, but I'm venturing into linguistic terrain a little here with the help of my dictionary. So the dictionary gives me the following definitions for the word currency. Firstly, something that is used as a medium of exchange, i.e. money. Secondly, general acceptance, prevalence, or vogue. Third, a time or period during which something is widely accepted and circulated. And lastly, the fact or quality of being widely accepted and circulated from person to person. So the different meanings of currency, that is, as a transactional medium, as circulation, as generally accepted or en vogue, form part of the technologies of control that often undermine academic efforts at making transformative contributions to the thriving of global Africa. And the twin axes of commodification and trendiness are very foundational to the derailment of our best efforts at producing knowledge that shifts something more than bibliometric indices and our upward mobility up the academic career ladder. And yes, we must pay rent and we must buy bread. So I'm not sneering down at that. I'm just saying, and what I hear Professor Adomako Ampofo to be inviting us is to say we can be more ambitious than that. We can do more than that. So flowing from currency then, we have my second keyword, which is belatedness. And it's something I've been very interested in lately. And again, something that comes to mind when I think about the ideas the lecture has mapped for us. And in relation to belatedness, then, a regular response to scholarly submissions by Africa-based scholars, and as you heard, I'm based on the continent, I'm educated on the continent, so I'm speaking from that location. Even though, again, there's no such thing as being from the continent. They're parts, they're norths in the continent, just in the same way they're souths in Europe and in Germany, and I bet in Bayreuth as well, if we look close enough. But I'm speaking from that positionality as an Africa-based scholar. So a regular response to scholarly submissions by Africa-based scholars to academic publications, research fellowships, and funders is that these submissions tend to be out of tune with current debates in their fields, or seemingly preoccupied with questions that are considered to be dated in other scholarly contexts. And this charge of belatedness is often framed in the diction of lack. Yeah, so it's lack of originality, lack of theoretical rigor, out of step with contemporary debates in the field of study, redundant, in a word, belated. So for a while, the assumption has been that our work, especially as Africa-based scholars, struggles with belatedness because it's produced in under-resourced environments with limited access to the latest academic research, which is often locked away behind paywalls, as Prof. Akosua Adomako Ampofo mentioned earlier. And so part of the response to this challenge has been that many stakeholders have set out to address this problem of access through legal and semi-legal ways, ranging from open access virtual special issues of journal content from major academic publishing stables, all the way to pirated e-library collections, which some of us might be familiar with, and don't quote me, and also all the way to fellowship opportunities at better resourced institutions. But the charge of belatedness persists, and these forms of access have often proved to be short-term palliatives. And so this is partly because the category belated lends false transparency to a much more complicated set of dynamics, because it inadvertently legitimizes our misrecognition of a much deeper systematically engineered set of circumstances that produce belatedness as a symptom of this debilitating infrastructure. And so my sense is that while lack of access to the latest scholarship in our respective fields contributes to deficits in rigor and originality, interventions that lower paywalls fail to fix these challenges for two reasons. Firstly, they overlook decades-old systemic problems that have almost decimated research cultures in many parts of the African academy. And in such context, then, access to cutting-edge research publications definitely shifts something, but the shift is too provisional to catalyze sustained production of what would qualify as rigorous cutting-edge research, in part because we all know that that research is a product of a practice, a culture, a thickly layered institutional infrastructure. So it's not an event, and I think that's part of the loophole that one is facing. And here I'm in a way echoing the crazy things, the crazy landscape within which we're operating here. But the second challenge here is that, of course, our research is perceived as belated because it's evaluated based on scholarly standards and registers whose benchmarks are the intellectual vernaculars, and I'm using vernaculars deliberately here, whose benchmarks are the intellectual vernaculars of Africanist scholars in better resourced locations, masquerading as normative neutral standards. And under these circumstances, then, scholars writing from under-resourced locations find ourselves perpetually playing catch-up to registers of engagement that are crafted elsewhere, while writing from locations that either do not support sustained critical engagement with or fluent emulation of those supposedly normative scholarly trends. So in that scenario, then, at best, our work will always look like passable, they're okay, but basically passable imitations of trends, methods, and theories and registers that are crafted elsewhere. So the question I find myself asking is, if we were to sidestep catching up to northern vernaculars that masquerade as normative registers of what academic engagement should look like, then what are the other possibilities that we might be able to unlock? What are the hidden opportunities in belatedness? And of course here, I'm sure the one text that comes to mind for many of us is Johannes Fabian's Time and the Other, How Anthropology Makes Its Object, because it's an important reference point in thinking through the question of time and belatedness. And of course, Fabian's notion of allochronist spatiotemporal distancing in reference to the ways in which those who are marked as non-Western others are often deemed to be lagging behind time is really key to making sense of this charge of belatedness that has historically marked Africans and African interventions as out of time. But beyond the academy, African life worlds are perpetually marked by these crisscrossing shadows of the charge of belatedness and the supposed need to, in a way, intervene and fast-track our integration into the referential contemporaneity of Euro-America as a normative time frame, right? So these deep-rooted logics of allochronic delay precede a lot of these scholars' work. And so one is stuck with the task of proving our coevalness, right? Proving our compliance with the methods, theories, and epistemes of Euro-American referential time. So when you're operating within these frames of intelligibility that mark you as either absent or delayed or not yet ready or underdeveloped or illiterate or primitive, as the scholar Keguro Macharia paraphrases belatedness, then it's very tempting to pursue currency in all the senses of the term at all cost. But the catch here is that what is often obscured by this charge of belatedness is the well-documented history of intentional undermining and sabotage of African universities by both African political players as well as Euro-American funding institutions right from their founding. And of course, we all know about the chaos that were unleashed by the World Bank's structural adjustment programs in Africa from the 1980s and what that did to the knowledge production landscape. And there's a whole extensive body of scholarship on this history, but it's rarely factored in when we confront this charge of belatedness as one of the crazy things that Tems, in a way, metaphorically references. And the third and final word then that comes to mind for me is I thought about Professor Adomako Ampofo's mapping of where we find ourselves and what we need to do about this state of affairs is refusal. So I've been thinking a lot about refusal, and I come to it via the etymology of the word refuse, which I find useful in 3 directions. So firstly, refuse is a verb that can mean to reject, to decline, or to disregard. Secondly, the term refuse is a noun that references waste, trash, rubbish, something that's been rejected. Lastly, my dictionary tells me that both of these words, that's refuse and refuse, have their roots in the Latin word, which I don't know how to pronounce. It's refuser, which has its own roots in turn in the word refunder, which means to restore or to give back or to return, according to my dictionary. And my dictionary says that this is where we get the word refund from. So I was very intrigued by this connection between repair, restoration, refund, and refusal and refuse. So refuse or refuse in these 3 meanings is a verb referencing rejection, is a noun referencing waste, and is a verb indexing repair, seems to me to be a useful thread that holds together the line of thought that was mapped by Professor Adomako Ampofo's lecture, because in some ways it sums up her answer to the question, how can we be true to an African agenda and survive and thrive in today's academy? And what I'm hearing, in a way, as a paraphrase of what she's telling us, is that one answer is by practicing refusal, right? And so if we look at the extensive body of scholarship on Africa and Africans' place in the world, then of course we come face to face with the long histories of exclusion from what the Jamaican scholar Sylvia Winter has termed defining statements of the human. And of course, we know, in as much as I'm talking here in reference to sort of histories of exclusion from literally the category human, we also know that these histories have colored perceptions of African studies relative to the so-called mainstream disciplines. So I'm sure historians might tell us about the kinds of tensions that exist between being a historian and being an African historian or a historian of Africa. In my own discipline, I can definitely tell you that in my discipline of literary studies, we still have hierarchies between English studies and African literary studies in English, right? So, and so in a way, these are carryovers from this earlier history of exclusion from the perimeters of the human that ultimately it leaks over into the disciplinary, not just boundaries, but also the values the value that is attached to certain bodies of knowledge. And ultimately, then the tag African comes with a certain undervaluing that has its roots in these histories of exclusion that we're sitting with. So these long histories of unhumaning of Afro-descended people and African life forms have always been underwritten by our categorization as refuse, as disposable categories of the human. And these histories continue to legitimize new waves of abandonment and disposability to date across global Africa, often under the leadership and the control and the power of fellow Africans, Afro-descended people. And of course, we also know that it extends beyond global Africa to many communities whose humanity is considered debatable, negotiable, disposable, as the elephant currently in the global room that Professor Adomako Ampofo nodded to reminds us. So I hear in her lecture then an invitation to respond to such unhumaning, not only of global Africa, but of all communities that struggle with different forms of unhumaning. I hear in the lecture an invitation to respond to these forms of unhumaning with a double refusal in the 2 senses of the word. Firstly, refusing this misrecognition of some categories of the human, and by extension, the forms of emancipatory projects that underpin global Africa. And secondly, refusing in the sense of repairing the broken fuse of our humanity. through knowledge practices and forms of solidarity and modes of relation that sidestep the compromising pressures of currency as well as the charge of belatedness that I talked about earlier. So of course, the repair work then is the toughest part of the task that confronts us in thinking about the freedom dreams of global Africa, because it demands a tenacious optimism that a different future is possible, that we can reach higher ground, as we had in the closing song. And this optimism is extremely difficult to generate and to activate in the face of so much that sometimes appears to spell the guaranteed defeat of our efforts. That there's so much evidence that seems to reinforce to us that actually, your victory is not guaranteed. So how do we cling to that optimism? How do we renew that optimism? And so I return again to Professor Adomako Ampofo's reference to storytelling as one of the ways in which we express our truths, and the role of creative expression, in her words, in seeking the places where the story was truncated, aborted, or deviated to address the trauma of historic dissonance, close quote. And so I take my cue from her to return to my discipline of African literature for one suggestion about how we insist ourselves into the future in the face of so much evidence that there's a lot, we're up against a lot. So, and for me, I see one such suggestion from African literature that says it is possible to insist yourself into the future regardless of the systems you're up against, even if the systems you're up against literally spell death. And the suggestion comes from Chinua Achebe's last novel. I'm sure we all know of Chinua Achebe. And his last novel was titled Anthills of the Savannah. So in this novel, we read about a story of the leopard and the tortoise. And the leopard had been looking for the tortoise for a long time, and for a while the tortoise had managed to escape the leopard, but one day, unfortunately, the leopard bumped into the tortoise on the path. So when the leopard caught up with the tortoise, he told him, yes, I've finally caught up with you, and I've really been looking for you, and yes, today is my lucky day, I caught up with you. So the tortoise asked the leopard for a few minutes to prepare his mind before he died. And clearly the leopard figured, look, you're going nowhere, right? So do you, right? So he stepped aside and he was like, yeah, go for it, prepare yourself. And now I'll quote from the novel, but instead of standing still as the leopard had expected, the tortoise went into strange action on the road, scratching with hands and feet and throwing sand furiously in all directions. Why are you doing that? Asked the puzzled leopard. The tortoise replied, because even after I'm dead, I would want anyone passing by this spot to say, yes, a fellow and his match struggled here, close quote. So in the face of the crazy things that perpetually threaten to silence us or co-opt our freedom dreams, it matters that we keep the struggle alive. And as the tortoise knew, it was important that future passers-by note, a fellow and his match struggled here. It was important that even in his death, he kept on trying and inscribed a message of hope into the future, a message that would outlive him. So one possible response to the question, what will we be remembered for? My hope is that in our different ways, we will cast into the future a spirit of creativity, of refusal, of optimism, that a different future is possible, that we can reach the higher ground that the song at the end was signaling, that ultimately that other future is possible. And we may not be around to see it, but we owe that future some kind of inscription into it, which is the point that the tortoise makes in his preparation. Even in his moment of surrender, he still insists himself into being into that future. And my sense of tonight's lecture is precisely that insistence into the future, and not just surviving, but thriving. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks infinitely for this extraordinary input you gave us. I don't want to take much time myself. I promised that we will have a Q&A session. We started a little late, but I think we should take perhaps up to 15 minutes for reactions and questions from the audience. And before I invite the audience, also online, using this function that is called F&A, Frage und Antwort, which is German for Q&A. But I would like to welcome in our midst His Excellency, the Ambassador of Burkina Faso to Germany, Professor Justin Waro, who is over there. It's really a pleasure to have you here. And for those who don't know Professor Waro, he's also a member of the Africa Multiple Cluster of Excellence, because he used to work at University Joseph Kizerbo in Ouagadougou before he was given the position as ambassador. So it's really great that you made the trip and crossed the Thüringer Wald with the snow today. Thank you so much for coming. So there is an Arabic adage which says, "Khair al-kalam maqalla wa dalla." The best speech is the short speech that is to the point. And on this note, I invite Q&A contributions. And of course, I think we will need both of you here, Professor Adomako Ampofo and Professor Musila. So the floor is open. Yes, please. You will get a microphone.
Thank you. So thank you to Professor Adomako Ampofo and Dr. Musila, Prof. Musila. So one thing that struck me from Professor Adomako Ampofo's presentation was Harry Belafonte. So I don't know, I kind of think like his legacy is a bit complicated. Like, I guess it's a case of he said, she said, but essentially as a kid said that he told her that there's nothing that a black woman could do for him, right? And if you're talking about centering, Africans and just like feminism and womanhood, and how do we reconcile that? When can we say that it's okay for this person to be cancelled? Like, when do we stop being charitable in our submissions? Thank you.
Okay, that's a tough one. First of all, I don't know that. So I will answer the question without referring to Harry Belafonte, because I'm sure you probably have your facts, but I don't know. It saddens me if this is something that he did say, and I'd want to see the context and all of that. When do we cancel somebody, I think, is the more important question. As I tried to convey in the lecture, at some point, all of us are going to misspeak. In my family at home, we have a saying that there are certain things we only say around the kitchen table. It's like we're not going out there to say them. But if you had a mic in the room, there would definitely be something one or the other of us said that would earn us cancellation. But it's a safe space. So we are able to say things that in polite company we might not say. We have the time and the space to explain why we're saying that, right? And this is why I also said read the room. It's not everything that's in here that needs to come out here, right? But to the more fundamental question, when should somebody be cancelled? I guess it depends on who is doing the cancelling, because what's your level of tolerance and what's my level of tolerance? How much grace am I going to give to somebody who spoke out of turn? How many times will I extend that grace? Will I extend it the first time? Okay, I forgive you. Maybe you apologized, right? And you made amends. Especially then, Akosua, will not cancel you. But again, it depends on what you said. But if you repeat the offense, then it's like you're not a serious person. So for me, it would be a depends answer. It also depends on what you said and whether it lines up also with your actions. So for me, there are people I don't follow. I don't cite them in my work anymore because their personal life doesn't line up with some of the things they say. In public, they sound fine, but we know some of the things that they do. This is me. I kind of have decided that I'm not going to. Again, it depends on what your offense is, but I try not to throw people under the bus in public, especially if I have the opportunity to speak to you in private and to say, dude, what you just said was really not cool, for us to have a conversation about it. They may say, hey, Akosua, you're making sense. Let me go and apologize, right? If I throw you under the bus in public, I've broken all the bridges. Like you and I, we can't communicate again because I really threw you out there. So I want to give people the chance to say sorry and to mend their ways. So a first offense, probably not. But then, having said that, there are some guys out there in the manosphere. You even get 0.0005 of grace from me because it's like we don't say those things, right? So it's a nuanced answer. I'm not trying to cop out. I'm really saying, what I think, and I will let Grace also respond, even though she didn't mention Harry Belafonte, so she can say, "Not my guy," but.
Okay. But are you offering to respond on our behalf, or is that a follow-up question?
Okay,
okay.
And you don't have to answer, but
no,
I
I'll
think the
yes,
I think.
On the cancellation, and I guess it's one we need to constantly confront. I don't know enough about cancelling, because it's a tool, clearly, that does some work. I'm unclear on the work that cancelling does in the collective sense, right? That when we cancel, because from my discipline, I know there are sections of the community that cancelled Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, for instance, and a whole range of writers who are problematic. And so for my discipline, these are huge challenge. That what do we do? And the question I will cop out by throwing it back to all of us to say, our reality as the human community broadly and the global African community specifically, and even more specifically, the continental African community, has been that a lot of our icons have given us so much, but taken away so much more, right? So, and here I would just obviously, if we go to our nationalist heroes, right? Because ultimately nationalism, problematic, etc. At the end of the day, it was a weapon and an important vehicle of African emancipation that we just cannot run away from that. But if you look at a lot of these folks, think, Kwame Nkrumah, think Haile Selassie, think Thabo Mbeki, a lot of these folks made so much possible, but they also did so much damage. And so the challenge then for me is always, what do I do with that? And how do we do it in ways that compel us to acknowledge what these people enabled and to simultaneously also acknowledge the harm they did? And my worry about cancelling is that it doesn't allow me to do that, in my understanding. But like I said, I don't understand enough of it as at all.
Absolutely.
And I would say the same about Belafonte then, that yes, he's clearly a problematic figure, but his work did so much space making. It did so much work in terms of just space making and making our humanity possible. So we need to figure ways of reconciling them.
And we're all filled with paradoxes and contradictions, right? So also, who will be left uncancelled at the end of the day? But then what's the barometer?
Yeah. No, I think your responses also clearly show that we are at a volatile moment in African studies. And all your observations and remarks, I think, were really pertinent to show where we stand also with the Africa Multiple Cluster. And I'm also grateful that the two of you are ready to walk with us in the advisory report. But we have one more question here. Is that right?
Thank you very much, Prof, for this very interesting lecture. My question is about how ready are the universities in Africa to shift to be more responsible, as you are calling for it. And I wonder also if the concept of the university as it is now, especially in Africa, is really made to change or to be a tool for the transformation of Africa in general. Thank you.
Did you hear it all? I didn't get
Well,
it.
the question was about the role of universities in Africa, broadly speaking, and specifically. Can you perhaps rephrase your question?
Sorry, I missed some of that. I don't know if...
I wonder if the universities in Africa nowadays, if they are really ready to shift, to change, to contest the idea of the university as it is, so that they can be ready to be a tool of emancipation in Africa. And the second one, the first one is about the idea of university itself. Like, does it fit really in this global transformative agenda?
Wow, not being a university administrator myself anymore. You know, when our universities were set up on the continent, some of them before independence, some of them after independence, and they have different histories and relationship to the colonial mission and so on. These were European constructs, right? I mean, we had old universities in Africa before these ones, but the universities, you know, we had ancient universities in Sudan and Egypt and several places. The current universities are European constructs. They came with disciplines constructed in a particular way, particular methodologies, questions, blah, blah, blah. In Ghana at the time, and talking about problematic, I mean, Nkrumah, right? But Nkrumah had the practical understanding that, you know what, this university is a contradictory space, a paradoxical space, can be a problematic space, but we're going to use it for the best that we can. The Institute of African Studies, where I'm located, was established by Nkrumah in '62, and there's a speech that he gave at the opening of the institute called The African Genius, where he gives us, it's really a manifesto of what we are supposed to do. And it's as relevant today as it was then. My understanding is that for Nkrumah, this was a compromise. So we're going to have this space that takes back the knowledge in the ways that we are supposed to. In fact, he says that we should study Africa in African-centered ways, bereft of the suppositions and whatever of Eurocentric knowledge. He specifically says that. He also says that we should think of the diaspora So this was a way, and his intention was that we might also then filter. So the Institute of African Studies has every possible discipline there. We've had lawyers, architects, sociologists, geographers, and so on, historians, political scientists, name it. His thinking was that this would filter into the quote-unquote mainstream departments. In some ways it did, in other ways it didn't. It goes like this. As Grace importantly said, people did work that they were not alive to see the fruits of, right? So it's gone like this. And I think that was a compromise to the existence of a university that is not necessarily creating an emancipatory space for everyone, and where we are wedded to these disciplines that can be problematic. So that's a long-winded answer. We've got the universities for good or ill. That's what we have. We're not going to bring back the ancient universities. We can't. So we have to work with the ones that we have. Personally, me, I'm a pragmatist. So I can decide to be inside the academy or say, you know what, this is a very problematic space, I'm going to leave. But I want to concede that there has been so much good work that has been done within spaces within the university. The university, university administrations, most of our universities are public universities. They have to think of the ministers of state, the presidents, and so on. They have to be politicians. But people within the university have done amazing work that has been transformatory, emancipatory, and so on. And I think that this is what we are both saying this evening, that those of us who are there should try and do. And we've had vice-chancellors who have also had that vision, and we've had vice-chancellors who have not. So it behooves us who have received the baton from other people who, people went to prison for the things that they believed in. So, it's up to us. And I forget the second question, but I'm going to pass the baton to you.
In a way, you've actually answered both of them, that as an institution, it's definitely problematic. And it's not just in Africa. The university as an institution is a problematic institution. But like many other institutions, right, that a lot of the institutions we operate under are very flawed. They're imperfect. But within their imperfection, there are pockets of room within which to do good work, and within which many people have done good work, both in universities on the continent and elsewhere. And for me, that's why I stay put in the academy, that I still believe in what the space of the university, even if it's aspirational a lot of the time, that possibility of pursuing ideas, knowledge, investing in certain understandings of relation, of community, of the future, and that insistence in that possibility. It is there, but again, it's our job to do exactly what Prof. Adomako Ampofo was reminding us earlier, those tips around how do we navigate around all these blockages. The obstacles are there, and they're there everywhere, I think, as we've learned from the recent Harvard situation. It's not just in Africa. But even in that Harvard, there are people who are doing good work. And in the same way, in Legon, in Moore University, in Wits University, there are pockets where we are doing transformative work. So a transformative university, likely, but transformative work from universities, it is happening. And that's why we're still there.
Thank you very much. I think it's also a reminder, I mean, whatever you said in your lecture and in your response, and what you just said in response to the questions, I think is for me also an important reminder of our ethical responsibility as academics, as scholars, as people who work in African studies. And it's an important takeaway for me. And I think we can conclude now. And I have to say a few words of thanks to quite a number of people.
We can sit down, right?
I will not name them. Well, I think you have to stay here.
Okay.
For a moment. So I want to thank our sign language interpreters for a formidable job. And I have to thank The team that was in charge of this event from the head office in the cluster, and that's particularly Nathalie Rödlingshöfer. And actually, there's a list of 20 people who I will not mention by name here, but I would like to mention Sabine Greiner, not sure whether she's here or outside, who's also been doing a tremendous job in publicizing our event and doing everything surrounding our PR. But the biggest thanks goes to the three of you. Akosua, thank you so much. Oops. Grace, I really appreciate it. And Fulera, please. Yeah, so let's thank again our speakers.